Fly, like the wind, like dogs pulling a sled. Mush, faster, like mad dogs. Hello again, or if you're new, welcome. Let's talk about Dogsred, the new series by Noda Satoru, following a figure skater seeking redemption through the world of ice hockey. We'll be doing a chapter summary in a moment, but just real quick, I want to point out that Dogsred is written and illustrated by the creator of another popular Shonen Jump series, Golden Kamui. That being said, I'll be pointing out some of the similarities that I noticed between the two throughout the chapters. So, with all that out of the way, let's move on, like dogs pulling a sled. We enter the story as a skater floats along the ice as if he were a phantom in the night, reciting the Mad Dog poem from earlier. He appears to be practicing, using the words as a motivation to forge ahead, to mush faster. It's a mysterious sequence concluding with a close-up of our protagonist's face as he speeds along. Following that dreamlike moment, our scene shifts drastically as we now find ourselves at an indoor skating rink. We're now properly introduced to our protagonist, Shirakawa Ro, a member of the Minami Fushimi Figure Skating Club. We're at the 2010 All-Japan Junior Championships, and it's Ro's turn to take the ice. Signs and flags showing support litter the crowd, many of whom are wearing shirts featuring Ro's face with an amusingly stoic expression. As he begins his routine, we begin being clued into Ro's circumstances. He had just lost his mother, Akiko, who had fallen asleep at the wheel and collided with a traffic post. Ro, tragically, was in the passenger seat as it all happened. It turns out, his mother had been exhausted from working so hard preparing a new skating program. The very same program that Ro is currently on the ice performing. After a subpar performance the day before, Ro was only sitting in 4th place. If he can't pull this off, he may lose his chance at a sponsorship, forcing him to quit the sport entirely. Continuing the trend of misery bearing down on our main character, we get a brief fragment of a memory when Akiko was a voice of encouragement for Ro. The only one Ro seems to have left is his twin sister, Haruna. Haruna, however, hasn't shown up to any of his competitions in years, and today is no exception, leaving Ro to face his burdens in isolation as he comes to stop at center ice. Cameramen ready their shots while the crowd holds its breath, and we briefly cut to a character named Yaginuma Masato as he observes Ro's program in progress. He has the most points in the competition, making him the one to beat. Ro exhales, his breath made frosty mist by the very environment he thrives in. Suddenly, he bursts forward with a magnitude of intensity that sends a shockwave across the awestruck faces of the stands. Naturally, the crowd is in shock while Ro maintains this focused intensity approaching his first jump. Skating backwards, looking over his left shoulder, Ro reverses himself and propels forward, throwing his arms behind him and launching into an axel. I don't think there's any way to tell how many rotations he gets in this jump, but I feel like it's safe bet to assume that there's at least 2.5. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not an expert on figure skating, so I guess consider that your disclaimer. Landing the axle with grace causes an enthusiastic exclamation about the impressive height of the jump. It's at this point that we're finally let in on Ro's thoughts for the first time since the opening moments. As expected, our main character is reflecting on his mother's final program, knowing he has to give this performance everything he can. In the midst of his inner monologue, he's still astounding the audience with his display of form and flexibility while performing a Bielmann spin. After exiting the spin, we see Ro as he launches into yet another axle, this one more noticeably a 3.5 rotation jump. Having landed all of his jumps and continuing to stun everyone watching, Ro brings the program to a close as the crowd roars and cheers for such a perfect performance. Funnily, we get another shot of Masato with his finger on his temple like he knows what he's up against. Cue the flowers being cast into the rink by adoring fans in celebration of such an impressive program. A serious expression forms on Ro's face as he makes his way off the ice and towards the kiss and cry, a small panel where the cameras can showcase a skater hearing their scores announced. Ro seats himself, flanked on either side by empty seats. The announcer reveals the score, and Ro is officially determined the winner of the championship. Hearing that, Ro's face changes to one of happiness and maybe a little shock before he clenches his fist and lets out a celebratory yell. The crowd is in tears, and we get another shot of Masato Chemical Romance sighing as he applauds Ro's victory despite being bumped into 2nd place. Humble guy. Spirits are at their absolute highest when a chair suddenly clatters onto the ice, prompting confusion from the once elated fans. Cutting back to the kiss and cry, Ro is already cocking back another chair to overhead throw, now wearing a pained expression. Chair number 2 slams into the side of the rink as the crowd puts holy and shit together at the realization that Ro may have lost it. Chairs were fun, but Ro has deadly weapons strapped to his feet, and he makes good use of them to slice up and kick a hole in the sponsor board behind him. Staff start trying to stop him from causing more damage, and 30 seconds to Masato attempts to figure out why Ro is doing all of this. This is met with the only logical response as Lo slips off one of his gloves and slaps Masato directly across the face with it like he's inciting a duel with pistols. Ro then attempts to take off across the ice as his fans look on in horror, and in one girl's case, throwing up in the corner. Don't ever meet your heroes, I guess. Ro's escape is thwarted, however, by little girls wielding the flowers that they had been gathering up from the ice earlier. They yell and cry, attempting to exorcise whatever demon they believe is possessing him. They're literally beating him up with his own celebration flowers. Guy cannot catch a break. I mean, what the effing fuck? Feels bad, man. After the rowdy conclusion to the championship, the media is discussing Ro, now dubbed the Rabbit Prince, and what his motivations were for ruining the event. It's even mentioned that Ro could have had a sponsorship deal coming off of his win at the championship. Speculation then turns to Ro's dream of going to the Olympics with his mother. As the newscasters debate about his reasons, Ro himself is waving goodbye to his adoring fans before boarding a plane with his sister Haruna. The pair are heading to Tomakomai, a city in Hokkaido. Meanwhile, we're brought to a hockey game in progress. And not just any game, this is the All-Hokkaido High School Ice Hockey Championship match being held in Obihiro. The match is between Amazuru High, hailing from Kushiro, and Oinokami High, the pride of Tomakomai. Turns out that both teams are good enough to have already qualified for the Inter-High National Tournament, where it's speculated that they'll be meeting again in the finals. We're given a brief explanation of what hockey is, comparing it to sports like basketball and soccer with a bit of combat sport DNA mixed in. We quickly see that summary put into effect as Oinokami dominates the ice, using their teamwork to shoulder check a path to shoot the puck and take home the victory. Despite winning, however, the team is noticeably aloof and unenthusiastic about it. Turns out that's because this school's team is going on a 20-year streak of winning the Inter-High Championship, making this just another step in the path for Oinokami. A young man yells out to two of the players from the bleachers, and we learn about Genma Keiichi, referred to as the younger Genma brother. His older brother, Koichi, is one of the current members of the team. Next year is Keiichi's opportunity to join the legendary team and help preserve their winning streak for another 3 years. And with that, we transition to Tomakomai, hometown of Oinokami and the location that the Inter-High National Tournament is being held at 1 month from now. Tomakomai also just happens to be where the Shirakawa twins have just arrived. Haruna is arranging for their ride from the station, while Ro dazzlingly helps an old woman who had slipped on the ice. Having been picked up by the grandfather, they start to get an idea of what life is like in this new place. They pass the paper factory that their grandfather had retired from and find out that there aren't any cockroaches here, which immediately excites Ro. Apparently, our hero has been having Haruna kill the bugs for him, and it's clear from her face that she wasn't pleased about having to deal with them for her brother. In place of cockroaches, Ro quickly discovers that bears are now the primary creatures to be afraid of. We're not in Tokyo anymore. As we drive, the industrial area gives way to tree-lined roads, and they come upon an impressive frozen pond with kids skating and playing hockey on it. Natural rinks like this used to be common in Tomakomai, contributing to the ice being woven into the culture. Even the twins' mother used to play here when she was a child, a fact that elicits two contrasting responses from the siblings. Ro looks inspired, rejuvenated even, while he stares out the window, whereas Haruna side-eyes her brother with a dark and almost suspicious expression. After the drive, the twins discuss their new environment and being grateful to their grandfather for taking them in after having been estranged from their mother for 20 years now. Ro has a scuffle with a cat, attempting to use a hockey stick from the closet to shoo it away. Much like the cockroaches, however, Haruna is the one to actually take care of the situation. After Ro has an outburst over his new living arrangements, Haruna grows stern and reminds Ro that it was his actions that got them both landed in Hokkaido. She finishes her scolding by asking him why he did it, but her question goes unanswered. Sometime after their conversation, Haruna looks for Ro only to hear from her grandfather that he left with his skates already. Turns out that Ro has gone back to the frozen pond they drove past earlier. Our conflicted protagonist glides around and reflects on his situation, skating out his inner monologue in an interpretive dance. He doesn't know what to do except make the best of the skating his mother had taught him. A group of children watches on as Ro is lost in his own world. One particularly intuitive girl comments on the weight and emotion of the figure skater's movements, much to the confusion of her fellow children. The children warn Ro not to skate too close to a hockey goal that's sitting on the ice unless he wants to face the wrath of Little Genma, a local hockey player. Ro listens to the tales of how Little Genma would beat up anyone who trespassed on Genma's sacred ground, going as far as dragging the defeated across the ice to draw a goal line in their blood. You know, normal middle school things. Some regular Lord of the Flies type. Shirakawa Ro muses about hockey for a moment, causing the children to warn him again. Personal favorite quote here is Beanie Kid, who elegantly states, "Hit the boards too hard, and you'll pass out and poop yourself," all while laughing maniacally. He is, without a doubt, my father as a kid. Having heard out the children, Ro skates back to the goal and welcomes a fight with someone who would threaten kids. As he performs a sit spin behind the goal, a puck is shot into the net, coming within a hair of hitting Ro's face. Children panic as Keiichi Genma enters the scene, armed with a hockey stick and a whole lot of pissed off, screaming out that Ro is going to get the goal line treatment. The battle is on as Ro faces down the charging Keiichi, skating backwards away to dodge the shoulder jack. Genma reacts by making a backhanded swing with his hockey stick, only to be dodged by the prowess and grace of a triple loop jump. For the second time this chapter, Ro takes one of his gloves off and uses it to slap his opponent before closing out the chapter with a two-footed spin as he taunts little Genma. Alright, now that we have the story thus far in a nutshell, let's crack it open. On the first page, we get such an intriguing use of a color page, making a thoughtful decision to minimize complexity to emphasize Ro's presence. A skater, drenched in white, accentuated against a looming pitch-black darkness. The tips of Ro's hair are given a light turquoise like a perpetual frost. Glacial blues breathe cold life into the icy mirror he dances across. With very little, Noda does a great deal to set the tone and focus. With little to distract us, we find ourselves being drawn into Ro and his thoughts, even though we too are in the dark on what's really happening here. Following that up, we get smacked with a color spread that directly opposes the quiet subtlety of the previous page, giving us our first peek at the dynamic and aggressive action we'll be in for. Ro charging ahead, wearing the Oinokami jersey. Keiichi and Koichi feature opposite of our main man, while Haruna hovers in the background with her signature stony look. The rest of the page is given to members of the Oinokami team on the sideline. When I first saw this, I noticed a lot of features in the characters that are similar to characters from Golden Kamui. They aren't straight up recycled designs or anything, but it reminds me a lot of reading series like Rave Master and Fairy Tail. I also want to mention that I don't know if it's intentional or not, but Ro's hockey stick covers up the guy in the green jacket's face, and it definitely earned a chuckle out of me. I mean, Noda made sure not to obscure anyone else's faces, but this poor dude in the back gets shafted? Moving on to the championship, I can't help but crack up at the fans wearing shirts with Ro's face looking like he's having a mugshot taken. These middle schoolers are also pretty well informed on Ro and what happened with his mother, which I guess makes sense for a fan club, but still. On top of that, anytime I'm reading a story and hear, the investigators think X caused Y, and it's just kinda left at that, I get a little suspicious. Call me crazy, but unless Ro was sleeping the entire time, you'd think he might have an idea of what happened that night. I mean, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt on account of the trauma, obviously, but I'm still kinda curious about that one. On a similar note, the flashback panel we get of Akiko and Ro strikes me as being fairly recent, possibly shortly before the accident. By the look on her face, she looks like she's already pretty worn down, and I wonder if we won't get more details behind this exchange in the future. The next page features a panel that drives home Ro's solemn solitude. The angle we're viewing from leaves only Ro on the ice and minor scenery that looks as cold as the ice itself. Nothing moves as they wait to see what our hero will do. Shattering that stillness is a sudden shift into Ro's dynamic movements. The way that Noda uses page turns to make his art pop even more is on full display here, similar to going from the scarcely colored first page to the in-your-face color spread. In fact, I feel like Noda is having fun with his art, reflecting the same whiplash we feel as readers into the crowd experiencing the shockwave of intensity Ro emanates with each motion. This is also when we're told that Ro's program is using Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, so I assume this is when the music would have started, but I'm not 100% on that. As I mentioned during the recap, I'm no expert on figure skating or anything, but when I was researching Ro's jumps and spins, I found that Noda did an incredible job of staying accurate in his portrayal of skating. This isn't too surprising. For anyone familiar with his previous series, you'll know that Noda masterfully weaves exceptional and sometimes absurd fiction within real-world history and culture. Page 14's framing and tone feels complementary to the first page. Here we see that the same abyss appears to be forming behind Ro, reaching up as if to confine him within a bubble. Even his outfit is a direct contrast for the way he's colored in the opening page, being closer this time to the sprawling darkness. Given how he goes on a rampage in the Kiss and Cry, it could also symbolize a rising tide of emotion that Ro is yet to process, bursting forth after the relief of knowing that he'd won with the final routine his mother would create. This is another scene that I particularly enjoyed the page turn effect on, moving from the confusion of the chair clattering into the rink to Ro with the second chair held high and ready to let fly. The cameraman in the shot there to remind us that every second of this outburst is being broadcast live. Later, during his destruction of the sponsor board, Masato seems genuinely concerned about Ro's actions when he approaches. I wonder how well these two knew each other, like longtime competitors, former friends, or just a guy doing the proper thing in the situation. Masato is even the one who tries to hold him back from skating away, even after eating some glove. I suppose we'll find out if he's just a punchline or someone that'll come up again later in a flashback or something like that. In the aftermath of the championship, Ro's new nickname of Rabid Prince is something that brought me back to Ro's thoughts from the start of the chapter. It makes sense that he would be comparing himself to a mad dog now that he himself is considered rabid for his outburst. On a side note, in Japanese the word rabid is even written using the same kanji as mad dog. Anyways, as the reporters cover the story of the championship, one of the interviewees, Aramaki Yoko, strikes me as a character we'll hear about again. She specifically mentions knowing Ro since he was a child, noting his dedication and desire to go to the Olympics alongside his mother. I wonder if Yoko isn't an old friend or acquaintance of Akiko's maybe. According to the news broadcast, Yoko participated in the Olympics herself, specifically in women's figure skating during the Nagano Olympics held in 1998, 12 years prior to our story. This would make the twins about 3 years old, and given how many skaters have to quit because they can't afford it, I wouldn't be surprised if the kids precipitated a switch from skating to coaching for Akiko. Akiko could have even been Yoko's coach before later coaching Ro when he got older. To add a final grain of salt to my baseless theory stew, Yoko is also the one to point out that she'd heard an airline company was considering Ro for a sponsorship deal, implying that she may still be involved in the sport or at least well informed on the rumors within the industry. Moving on, I don't have too much to say about the hockey match. I thought it was a pretty snappy introduction for the Oinokami team and for Keiji himself. I do think it's a fun detail that both Genma brothers appear to have square irises and square pupils, giving them a pretty noticeable feature that will probably be helpful when everyone's wearing helmets with face masks later on. On the flip side, there is a little more to mention as the twins arrive in Tomakomai, firstly being the aerial shot of the city that we're given as we transition from the hockey match. The image that Noda used for reference is a stunning shot capturing the proximity of this thriving city to the snow-covered mountains surrounding it. The station was also drawn with great care and attention to detail, accurately depicting the southern exit. If you go on Google Maps, you can actually drop onto this corner here and pan to the side, zoom in a bit, and you practically have the same exact shot from the manga. The statue of the hockey player is hard to get a good view of, and I couldn't really find too much about it, but it's clearly having attention drawn to it in the scene, for probably obvious reasons. Speaking of having attention drawn to it, in the first shot of the frozen pond that we get, the sacred goal is noticeably being avoided by even the hockey players on the ice. There's also a shadow or shading on the ice around the goal that makes it stand out a little. Then the twins' grandfather mentions their mother, and the reactions are something worth keeping in mind, particularly with Haruna, who I suspect didn't have as fond of a relationship with their mother. Maybe she wasn't as good of a skater, or coaching Ro took up a lot of her time and attention. We just don't know much yet. What we do know, however, is that Haruna seemed to actively avoid coming to Ro's events, suggesting that the rift had already existed for years. Familial distance sounds like it runs in the family, with Akiko and her father having been estranged for 20 years prior to taking in the kids. And now is probably a good time to mention that anytime we get dates like that thrown around, I have to wonder why we get that information. Is it an arbitrary number, or does it have something to do with Oinokami's winning streak beginning around the same time? Either way, that would be 5 years before Ro and Haruna were born, which gives Akiko time to chase her dream, move to Tokyo, meet Yoko if they didn't already know one another, meet the kids' father, as well as whatever happened to that father. At some point I'll have to put together a timeline before my theories get too wild and out of hand on such things. As for Ro going back to skate on the natural rink, there isn't too much to know. We get an amusing look into Ro's shallow side as he talks himself into speed skating, only to lament that his jeans won't fit when his legs get chunky, as he puts it. I do find it curious that if he doesn't want to get bigger, hockey seems like a strange thing to take an interest in. But I suppose little Genma probably provides compelling motivation, what with Ro showing him up on the ice with grace and style. With that though, the curtain falls until the next chapter, where we'll find out how this fight between two sports pans out. If I got something wrong or missed something, let me know below, and make sure to keep an eye out for the next part of this series. Until then, stay warm, and don't beat up kids. Class dismissed.